This preparatory lesson is from John, chapter 18, verses 28 through 40. Jesus is brought before Pilate. John, chapter 18, verse 28. Then they brought Jesus from Caiaphas into the praetorium, and it was early, and they themselves did not enter the praetorium, so that they would not be defiled, but might eat the Passover. End of verse 28. The judgment hall, the praetorium, was the headquarters of the commanding officer of the Roman military camp. It could also be the headquarters of the Roman military governor. In this case, that governor would be Pilate. Pilate's regular headquarters was in Caesarea, in the palace that Herod the Great had built. However, Pilate and his predecessors made it a point to be in Jerusalem during the feasts in order to quell any potential riots. Because of those circumstances, Jerusalem became his praetorium, or headquarters. Jewish oral law gives evidence that a Jew, who enters the dwelling place of a Gentile, becomes ceremonially unclean. So, by remaining outside, in the colonnade, they avoided that contamination. John loads this verse with great irony by noting the chief priests' unscrupulousness in the matter of ceremonial cleansing. Meanwhile, they were incurring incomparably greater moral defilement with their proceedings against Jesus. John documents that the high priests would not go into the building, and because they were so caught up in the law, they would not recognize the Savior of the world. John, chapter 18, verse 29. Therefore, Pilate came out to them and said, "What accusation are you bringing against this man?" End of verse 29. That question formally opened the Roman civil phase of proceedings against Jesus. The fact that Roman troops were used for Jesus' arrest proves that the Jewish authorities communicated something about this case to Pilate in advance. Although they most likely had expected Pilate to confirm their judgment against Jesus and order his death sentence, Pilate ordered instead a fresh hearing, in his presence. Pilate is the Roman governor in authority and therefore comes out to judge the matter. Boldly, his question to the Jews is, "What do you accuse him of?" John, chapter 18, verse 30. They answered and said to him, "If this man were not a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you." End of verse 30. That is an evasive answer to Pilate's question. Really, those that want Jesus gone do not have a legitimate complaint to make. They know they are limited in the severity of the punishment they can do, so they want Pilate to do their dirty work for them. John, chapter 18, verse 31. So, Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves, and judge him according to your law." The Jews said to him, "We are not permitted to put anyone to death." End of verse 31. When Rome conquered Judea and began direct rule through a prefect in AD 6, capital judgment, the right to execute, was taken away from the Jews and given to the Roman governor. Capital punishment was the most jealously guarded of all the attributes in Roman provincial administration. The chief priest's evil plan is now out in the open. Jewish law prohibits them from killing Jesus. So, they have brought him to Pilate so that he could do their dirty work for them. They want to kill him, yet they do not want to take the blame for his killing. They are jealous and afraid that Jesus will dethrone them. Ultimately though, they do not want to lose their status, or their followers. John, chapter 18, verse 32. This happened, so that the word of Jesus, which he said, indicating what kind of death he was going to die, would be fulfilled. End of verse 32. Jesus said that he would die by being lifted up. However, if the Jews had executed him, it would have been by throwing him down and stoning him. God providentially controlled the political procedures to assure that when his death sentence was finally passed, Jesus would be crucified by the Romans, and not stoned by the Jews, as was Stephen in Acts, chapter 7, verse 59. The Jews preferred this form of execution, stoning someone, based on Deuteronomy, chapter 21, verse 23. Pilate represents the Gentiles. The high priests and other Hebrew leaders represent the Jews. As we know, with God, there are only two types of people in the world, Jew and Gentile. Both were equally guilty of the death of Jesus. It is important to note that Jesus, in every detail, fulfills the scriptures with his death. John, chapter 18, verse 33. Therefore, Pilate entered the praetorium again, and summoned Jesus, and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" End of verse 33. Pilate had gone away from Jesus' accusers, back into the hall. His question to Jesus is not, "Have you committed a crime?" but, "Are you king of the Jews?" John does not mention it in his recording of the events, but Pilate's wife had warned her husband of a dream she had about Jesus. Because of that dream, she asked Pilate to have nothing to do with the proceedings. John, chapter 18, verse 34. Jesus answered, "Are you saying this on your own, or did others tell you about me?" Jesus demanded witnesses to his alleged crimes as he speaks to the conscience of Pilate. However, Pilate is the one on the defensive, not Jesus, and he says to Pilate, in a sense, "Are you going to condemn me on hearsay alone?" Pilate's real concern is whether Jesus has incited rebellion against Rome. Jesus' answers show that is not the case, and for that reason, Pilate finds no fault with him. John, chapter 18, verse 35. Pilate answered, "I am not a Jew, am I? Your own nation, and the chief priests, handed you over to me. What have you done?" End of verse 35. Pilate has no evidence of wrongdoing by Jesus, and he is sincere in wanting to know what crime Jesus has committed. He feels Jesus must have done something or his own people would have not brought him, accusing him. John, chapter 18, verse 36. Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would be fighting so that I would not be handed over to the Jews, but as it is, my kingdom is not of this realm." End of verse 36. Jesus' use of the phrase "my kingdom is not of this realm" meant that his kingdom is not connected to any earthly political or national entities. Nor does it have its origin in the evil world system that is in rebellion against God. If his kingdom were of this world, he would have fought for it. The political figures of this world preserve themselves, and their power, by fighting with force. The Messiah's kingdom does not originate in the efforts of man, but with the Son of Man forcefully, and decisively, conquering sin in the lives of his people, and someday, conquering the evil world system at his second coming when he establishes the earthly form of his kingdom. At that time in history, his kingdom was no threat to the national identity of Israel, or the political and military identity of Rome, since it only exists in the spiritual dimension until the end of the age, as recorded in Revelation, chapter 11, verse 15. During all of this, Jesus is speaking to Pilate in a way that Pilate understands. Pilate knows that earthly kings have armies that fight for them. Jesus is telling Pilate that his is a spiritual kingdom, and until the time comes, not a physical kingdom. John, chapter 18, verse 37. Therefore, Pilate said to him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say correctly that I am a king. For this purpose, I have been born, and for this, I have come into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." End of verse 37. Jesus is telling Pilate that the things which are happening to him are things that must happen. He says that all he has done is tell the truth, and those who recognize the truth, hear him. John, chapter 18, verse 38. Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" And after saying this, he came out again to the Jews, and said to them, "I find no grounds at all for charges in his case." End of verse 38. In response to Jesus' mention of truth, Pilate responded rhetorically with cynicism, convinced that no answer existed to the question. His retort proved that he was not among those who the Father had given to the Son. Pilate was truly interested in the case against Jesus. His was not just a play on words, since he was an intelligent man, and knew that Jesus was not guilty of any crime. John, chapter 18, verse 39. However, you have a custom that I release one prisoner for you at the Passover. Therefore, do you wish that I release for you, the King of the Jews? End of verse 39. It is obvious from this announcement that Pilate knows Jesus is innocent, so he tries to get the people to request the release of him at the Passover. John, chapter 18, verse 40. So, they shouted again, saying, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a rebel. End of verse 40. The word rebel means one who seizes plunder, and may depict, not only a robber, but a terrorist or guerrilla fighter who participated in bloody insurrections. Barabbas, though, was a robber. He was guilty as charged. Jesus was not guilty of any crime. Pilate knew that jealousy and envy had caused the high priests to want to do away with Jesus. He also thought that by offering to free someone at Passover, that they would surely choose Jesus to be set free. He had underestimated their hatred for the Son of God. The chief priests and elders had power over the people, and they persuaded the people to ask for Barabbas, instead of Jesus, to be freed.